I'm fascinated by you, and I'm fascinated by anybody who does the kind of shit that you do. I mean, please explain to people all the different ultra marathons you've done and like what you've accomplished.
Yeah, it's interesting because like I still kind of see myself as a pretty average runner because like I competed in high school and made state cross country and state track and that kind of thing for a small school, and then I went to a small Division III school and was pretty much average amongst a real good program at the D3 level, and I always just did kind of like running longer though. So like once I got done with college, I kind of decided, well, let's see what's longer than some of those traditional like collegiate races of like 5K to 10 kilometers. And I started kind of just dabbling that stuff. And then in 2010, I think I actually did my first ultra marathon, partly because I was just like looking around and there turned out to be one in the state. I was living in Wisconsin at the time. And there was one that was kind of in my neck of the woods, and I actually had just decided to go back to grad school, and that one had a $1,000 prize purse on it. And I was like, you know what? If I can win that, $1,000 go a long way during grad school. So I did that one, and I ended up winning it, and it definitely hooked me. It was like the type of thing where I was like, I want to do more of these. And by 2011, I kind of jumped all in at the end of the year and did 3 50-milers, and I think it was about a 9-week time frame. And
that's so crazy.
Yeah, and I mean it gets crazier. There's some freaks out there. There's guys who will do like a couple in a weekend and stuff like that. So I mean it never ends. But yeah, it was one of those things where after that I was totally hooked. So
what is it that got you hooked?
It had to be partly just a little bit of success. I wasn't necessarily used to winning, so. Like, I mean, I've had good races and good times relative to what you probably see, like, in an average person. But, when I went to, like, a competitive 5K, competitive marathon or something like that, I wasn't going to win unless it was kind of a local race. So kind of finding, it's like anything, I guess, you kind of gravitate to what you feel you're good at, and then that kind of piques your interest. So that was part of it. The other part was just I really enjoyed doing the long run. Like when you break up kind of like a training week, you have like a variety of different things. You've got like kind of, base level runs, you've got specific workouts for the distance, and then most training programs are gonna have a long run once a week, and that was the one that was always my favorite. So wrapping my head around doing a bunch of those a week instead of just one was really kind of appealing to me. And when you're putting that much time into whatever you're training for, it's, I think, important to enjoy it. So being able to kind of enjoy the training process a lot was really appealing to me. And then it's just the variables. Like when you're out there for that long, there's so many variables to consider, and it's a blast for me to kind of like work through those, plan for those, and then adjust to them on the fly when you're out there, and things inevitably go wrong or things pop up that you didn't expect. So it's kind of hard to explain, but it's weird. One of the things in ultra marathon running that people will always say is like they'll have a race, and even if they have a bad race, say like I'm never doing one of these again, and then the next day they're on the internet looking for another race. So it's just this weird thing about it that you don't really know until you do it, but it sucks you in.
That's the case with a lot of people when they talk about things that are like that they have to suffer through. Mm-hmm. I've heard that when guys talk about like those extreme hikes, mm-hmm. When they like they do that, that one that goes from Georgia all the way to Maine. Do you know that insane hike? What is that called? The Appalachian Trail?
Yep.
Yeah. That they say, I'll never fucking do that again. And then they're like, okay, what other hikes can I go? It's just once the pain, the physical pain dies down, there's something about that challenge that stimulates in people like you and people that are into these really long distance things. Like there's something about distance. There's something about like you were saying, like, you weren't the best runner in high school or college, right? But there's mm-hmm. something about the mind of an ultra marathoner. It's a different mind. The type of person that can run 100 miles, 200 miles, 238 miles, those type of people, they're different people. And there's a strength, a mental strength, and the ability to just keep going on and on and on that I'm absolutely fascinated with.
Yeah, and it is interesting too, because it's the sport's grown quite a bit in the last decade or so, but it's still very much kind of a niche group. And then when you kind of hang out in that group, you start to kind of normalize it a little bit, I think. So then you start thinking like, 100 miles, it's just what we do. And then you actually try to like separate yourself from the fact that you've done a few of those, or separate yourself from the fact that you've been hanging out with other people who are doing it, and you realize, this is actually kind of a weird thing to kind of do as as a human nowadays.
It's fucking very weird. How many of these things have you won?
I don't know how many I've won. I think I've done just shy of 50 total now. Everything from 50 kilometers. So the furthest I've done is 200 kilometers, which is about 125 miles. I'd have to look to see how many I've won. It's really goofy because when you start getting into the longer stuff like 100 miles and beyond, you start, at least in my training program, you start to kind of pick smaller races to kind of use as training runs. And some of it I think is just because for me, if I'm going to go out and do like a 30 mile or a 40 mile training run or something like that, it's kind of tedious to do that by yourself and then plan all the logistics of it. So if there's a race nearby and that's not too hard to get to, it's easier just to sign up for that, go and do that. So some of those, I'll win if they're small enough, even though I'm not necessarily trying to go all out, so to speak, because I'm hoping to recover kind of and get back into training.
So you'll pace yourself at one of these local races, maybe?
Yeah, the way I describe it is, and this is a real hard thing for a lot of people to do. I think it's like you go into a race saying this is going to be a moderately difficult long run, so maybe a little faster than what I would do if I was just going to do it by myself, like unsupported, that sort of thing. And then I always tell myself 80% is the hardest you can go if you want to be able to come back and start training on time to meet the actual goal or the A race. So when I do those, it's one of those things where who knows, someone might show up that's like as fast as you or maybe a little slower than you normal. And if they're deciding to just hammer it that day, they might beat you and you got to be okay with that.
Does the competitive part of you flare up though?
For sure. Well, yeah, it does. And that's the hardest part. And that's, I think, the main reason why some people won't do that approach, because there's certainly people who they stay away from races unless it's their A race. And they just say, if I'm going to do a long run, I'll do it on my own and not do that. Or, there's certainly, I'm sure, folks who do it and then they get caught up and then end up leaving their A race out on the B race, I guess, so to speak. So, it's interesting. It's kind of a sport that I think is still a lot to learn, which I think is actually the case for a lot of things that, even things that are well established, there's always something to learn or new things to pick up on.
Well, it's one of those things, right, where once someone runs 100 miles and then a bunch of other people start doing it, like you said, it almost becomes normalized. Mm-hmm. And then people start to try to push that boundary. Now, I've been hearing talk about the woman Candace who runs the Moab 240.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they're talking about doing a 500. Well, I heard that. I was like, you're out of your fucking mind. People are going to die. But maybe that'll be normal in 5 years, and we'll get used to like 4 or 5 day races.
Yeah, so it's really fascinating. It took me a couple of years to do this before I got into the sport, but once I was in it for a couple of years, I kind of did a little research to see like what the deal was with some of this stuff. And the funny thing is, like, that type of a distance isn't even unheard of. I forget what the book is called, but they actually had in Madison Square Garden, they used to host a 6-day event where guys and gals, I'm not sure if gals were doing it back then, but guys for sure were going there and seeing how far they could run in 6 days. And I know, crazy. And I think if I remember right, people were betting on them that way, and so they'd fill it up. Like, people would come and watch this like spectacle.
What year was this?
It was in the late 1800s, I think, is when they started it. I'm not sure when it.
Oh, here it is. 6-day cycling. The 6-day grind at Madison Square Garden.
Probably ran too.
Oh wow! Look at this, man.
So some crazy person decided to leave the bike at home, I guess.
This is super old. We're looking at this on YouTube, folks. It says 6-day cycling, the 6-day grind at Madison Square Garden, and so it's just a track. And these people are. This is old timey shit. This looks like the 30s, right?
Yeah.
And that guy just went down. And so they're just riding their bike for 6 days. Oh, shit, when they wipe out. Oh, my God. They probably had terrible brakes back then, right?
Yeah, that was their feet.
Probably, right?
Or the railing. But yeah.
So endurance sports like this are nothing new.
Yeah, it's actually fascinating when you kind of look into it, because nowadays in the United States, the trail running scene is definitely way bigger than like the road running or certainly the track scene. But that wasn't always the case. If you look back into like the 70s and 80s, there was a pretty big surge in ultramarathon running for flat fast stuff. That's where we see a lot of the records coming from.
So that's like a track, and you run as far and long as you can on a track, like
track or a road or really flat road.
I had Goggins on, David Goggins,
Oh, yeah.
and he was talking about the first time he did one was on a track.
Okay,
Just ran in circles on a track, which is almost got to be more taxing for your mind because you're just seeing the same shit over and over and over again.
Yeah, it's really fascinating to me because I've done both. I've done 100 milers on the trail and I've done 100 miles on a 400 meter track. And the fascinating thing is it is like what you said, it's almost a different event where mentally you're doing everything you can on that track to kind of separate yourself from the actual environment, envision yourself being somewhere else, looking forward to little things to kind of not necessarily be thinking too far in advance because that can get overwhelming. Whereas when I'm out on the trails, it's like you're usually in a pretty pristine, beautiful area, and you can kind of just take it as it comes and say, "Oh, cool! Now I get to see that," or "This is a neat area," or "I like this section," and you look forward to that kind of diversity. Whereas on the track, it's you see it once and you've seen it every time, and then it just kind of beats you up mentally from that side of things. But then there's other things about that too that help out, like logistically. When you're on a track for 400 meters, you bring out one person, you put everything you may possibly want on a little table, and if I want something, I say, "Hey, can I get that?" And 400 meters later, I have it. And even if we mess it up, I'll get it 400 meters after that. So yeah. Whereas the trails, it depends. They've gotten a lot better with aid stations as the sport's grown. But like. You mess up your aid station, or if you get caught up in the moment and just blow through it and don't take care of yourself, you might have to suffer for an hour plus before you get help again. So that's where it kind of gets a little different, I think, logistically when you're on the trails versus on the road. And but yeah, it's kind of a different thing. The track is interesting too in the sense that you're essentially making that same exact motion the whole way. So like there's certain areas of your body that fatigue. And they don't get a break. The turn and just running flat. Running flat, you're going to kind of localize some of the way you stimulate your muscles, or your gait is going to be pretty similar throughout. Whereas when you're on the trails, like you might be going on a slight incline, a steep incline, a slight decline, a little bit of flat, some rolling, all kinds of things in between. And then trails can be kind of undulating. So you're just kind of moving all that forces around your legs a little more than you would be when you're running on a flat surface. So, it's one of the things that I always tell like my coaching clients and myself when I'm planning for something is like, if you really want to meet your full potential, like specificity is king. You need to be on that environment, in the environment you're going to race on, and really get your body used to kind of that type of a motion. And it makes it a little more interesting when you're doing a track race because that means some kind of long runs on a track. So you're kind of balancing doing just enough to get ready for it and not doing too much so that when you get to the race, you're like, screw this, I've done too much of this already. I don't want to see another loop. Yeah, it's kind of an interesting concept.